Chuck Norris. A name that doesn't just echo through pop culture, it thunders through decades of cinema, martial arts, and American iconography. To millions, he wasn't just the man who roundhouse kicked evil into submission or brought law and order as Walker, Texas Ranger. He was the embodiment of resilience, the living symbol of what happens when discipline meets pain and transforms it into purpose. But beyond the movie sets and the martial arts titles, beyond the unshakable stare and iron fists, lies a story few truly know. It begins not with glory, but with silence, fear, and a fragile boy growing up in a house where every creaking floorboard could mean danger, where love came with bruises, and where the only way out was up. Long before the world would chant his name in awe, Chuck Norris was just Carlos Ray, an ordinary boy trapped in a world that offered no softness, no protection, and no promise. Born in 1940 in the dust-worn town of Ryan, Oklahoma, Chuck entered life already surrounded by struggle. Ryan wasn't a place known for second chances. It was a place where people worked the land hard, prayed harder, and carried their pain in silence. And for Chuck's family, even silence came with bruises. His father, Ray D. Norris, returned from World War II not as a hero, but as a man torn in places no one could see. Like too many veterans, he brought the war home with him, etched into his nerves, bottled in his hands. The war had taken something essential from him: stability, peace, maybe even the capacity for love. What replaced it was alcohol, copious amounts that dulled his memories but sharpened his temper. And inside the small wooden house tucked into the quiet streets of Ryan, that temper erupted too often. Chuck would later write that the most terrifying moments were not the outbursts themselves, but the unpredictability. A slammed door, the sound of running water, the creak of old floorboards. Any of these could turn a quiet evening into a storm. His mother, Wilma, did what she could, wrapping her children in a kind of exhausted love that bent but never broke. She worked jobs that paid pennies, sometimes hiding small amounts of money in flour tins or under mattresses, praying Ray wouldn't find them before she could buy bread. But he usually did. Even as a child, Chuck understood that his home was not a place of comfort. It was a battlefield disguised as a family. And it wasn't just the fear that shaped him. It was the emptiness. Emptiness of food, of joy, of safety. He would watch other kids laugh, chase balls, enjoy dinner time. And he'd return to a house where he sometimes went to bed hungry, pretending to be asleep so he wouldn't hear the arguments. The most consistent thing in young Chuck's life was inconsistency. His father would vanish for weeks, then return without explanation, sometimes drunk, sometimes mean, sometimes strangely quiet, but always damaged. Chuck didn't hate him. He couldn't. Children don't come into the world knowing how to hate their fathers, but he feared him. And worse, he feared becoming him. Even school couldn't offer escape. Chuck was shy, introverted. He had no athletic talent, no standout grades, and carried the invisible weight of poverty in every interaction. Classmates would whisper about his torn clothes, the smell of cigarettes and alcohol that lingered on him. He didn't have the words to explain the war happening at home. So he learned to keep quiet. But the most tragic part of this chapter isn't the abuse, the fear, or the shame. It's that for a long time, Chuck believed this was normal, that pain was simply part of being alive. That survival, just making it through the night, was all he could hope for. And yet, beneath all that heartbreak, something was forming. Not just trauma, but resolve. The earliest seed of the man who would one day rise, not because he was stronger, but because he had already lived through the kind of pain most people never talk about. There comes a point in every wounded child's life when fear transforms into something else, into defiance. For Chuck Norris, that moment arrived in a house that had seen too many bruises and too many broken promises. He was just 14 years old, barely tall enough to look his father in the eyes, but in that moment, he no longer looked at Ray Norris as a parent. He saw him for what he had become, a threat. It was a night like so many others, thick with alcohol, tension hanging in the air like static before a lightning strike. Wilma, his mother, had said something, perhaps too soft to even be heard by anyone else, but Ray had heard it. Or maybe he imagined it. The rage flared, sudden and senseless. Chuck watched it unfold from across the room, his younger brothers frozen, their eyes wide with a fear they had known too long. But Chuck moved. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He walked into the kitchen, hands trembling, and returned with a hammer gripped tight in his fist. It was the first time he'd ever stood between his father and his mother, not as a child begging for calm, but as a barrier. He raised the hammer, voice low and shaking, and said nothing. He didn't need to. The message was clear. There was no fight that night. Ray, in a rare moment of clarity, paused, the fury drained from him, not out of shame but perhaps surprise. His son, the quiet one, the good one, was now the defender, the protector. The boy had become the man the household needed, even if only for that one night. That act did not fix anything. It did not save the family. But it carved a line in the sand, one that Chuck would never again cross. He had felt what it was like to be powerless. And now, for the first time, he had chosen power, not in violence, but in defense, not to harm, but to hold the line. It was that night, standing in the shadows of fear, that Chuck Norris made his first real vow: I will never become him. That promise would shape everything: his discipline, his work ethic, his obsession with control, with precision, with never letting chaos win again. It wasn't just martial arts that would define him in the years to come. It was this moment, a quiet act of resistance from a terrified teenager, that gave rise to the man the world would one day call unbreakable. In 1958, 18-year-old Chuck joined the United States Air Force and was stationed at the Osan Air Base in South Korea. That's where he encountered Tong Soo-do, a Korean martial art that would ignite something inside him that had been buried beneath years of pain and silence. He wasn't a natural athlete, far from it. He was slow, awkward, lacked flexibility. Even his instructors weren't impressed. But Chuck had something no one else could see: discipline born of pain, and an obsession with self-mastery that would drive him beyond his limits. He trained until his body ached. Then he trained more. I was nobody growing up, Chuck later said. But martial arts gave me identity. It gave me a reason to believe I could become something. By the time he returned to California in 1962, Chuck wasn't just a serviceman. He was a man with a mission. He opened his first karate school and taught students while working other jobs just to keep the doors open. The rooms were often empty, the rent overdue. But Chuck swept the mats himself, taught whoever would show up, and kept believing. Chuck began entering karate tournaments in the early 1960s. His first competitions were brutal. He lost, often, and badly. Every defeat felt like the world telling him he wasn't enough. But Chuck had already been told that his whole life, and he'd already decided that voice no longer held power over him. He trained harder. By 1967, he won his first major title and went on to become professional middleweight karate champion, a title he held for 6 consecutive years. His name echoed across the martial arts world. He didn't just become a champion. He became a teacher of champions, training celebrities like Steve McQueen, Priscilla Presley, and Donny Osmond. But even in these victories, a shadow loomed. Because back home, his younger brother Wieland, the same brother he once shared meals with in that broken Oklahoma house, was about to step onto a battlefield Chuck could not protect him from. In 1970, Wieland Norris, just 21 years old, was deployed to Vietnam. He was known for his light, his humor, his warmth, but he also once confided to Chuck that he didn't think he'd live past 27. While walking point on patrol, Wieland spotted an enemy ambush and shouted a warning, saving his unit but paying with his life. Chuck received the telegram. His knees buckled. His death left a hole in my heart that will never heal, Chuck would later write. That pain never left, not in his most famous movie roles, not even when millions cheered. He would wear the uniform of a soldier on screen, but never without the memory of his brother. In 1972, Chuck Norris stepped into film. And not just any film. He starred opposite Bruce Lee in The Way of the Dragon. Their climactic fight in the Roman Colosseum became legendary. Even though his character lost, Chuck's intensity and presence couldn't be ignored. Hollywood took notice. But it wasn't smooth sailing. The late 70s were filled with near misses. His movies didn't always succeed. Studios were hesitant, but Chuck pushed forward. By 1978, Good Guys Wear Black finally clicked with audiences. And from there, he became the American action star of the 1980s. The Octagon, Lone Wolf McQuade, Missing in Action, Code of Silence, The Delta Force. Each role a fusion of martial arts mastery and all-American justice, but every bullet fired, every explosion on screen, was haunted by the one battle he never got to fight, with his brother beside him. Chuck married his high school sweetheart Diane in 1958. They were together for 30 years and had 2 sons, Mike and Eric. But fame is unforgiving. The constant travel, the spotlight, the exhaustion, it took its toll. In 1988, their marriage ended. Chuck was shattered. Then came a letter from a woman named Dina. She told Chuck she was his daughter, born during his military service. Her mother had kept the truth hidden for decades to protect Chuck's marriage. The moment he saw Dina's face, he saw himself. And with that came crushing guilt. He reached out, sought forgiveness, and built a relationship. But the regret, missing birthdays, school plays, her first heartbreak, never left. She became a blessing, Chuck said. But I'll never stop wishing I had been there. In the late 1980s, Chuck formed a deep friendship with Lee Atwater, a brilliant political strategist full of energy and ambition. In 1990, Atwater collapsed during a speech. He was diagnosed with a brain tumor, terminal. Chuck visited him often, watching his once vibrant friend fade into a shadow of the man he was. If it could happen to him, it could happen to me, Chuck later admitted. Lee died in 1991, just 40 years old. Chuck was never the same. His legend was built on invincibility. But this loss taught him that mortality is the one enemy no one defeats. In 1998, Chuck married Gina O'Kelly. They had twins in 2001, and for a moment, peace returned, until 2013. Gina went in for a routine MRI. The contrast dye, gadolinium, triggered a rare, horrifying reaction. Her nervous system began to shut down. She could barely speak, she couldn't walk. And the woman Chuck had built a life with was slipping away. Chuck gave up everything, his career, his public life, his film projects. He became her full-time caregiver. "She's dying in front of me," he said, his voice breaking. Over $2 million was spent in treatments. He prayed, he begged, and he stayed. Not the warrior on screen, but the husband by her side. He showed the world a different kind of strength, one measured not in kicks or punches, but in love, devotion, and unbreakable commitment. Today, Chuck Norris lives quietly on a vast ranch in Navasota, Texas. He's 85 years old. His fortune is estimated at over $70 million. But what he treasures now isn't money. It's Gina, still recovering. It's Dakota and Danilee, now grown. It's the memories and the silence. The legends remain. The memes still float online. But inside that ranch, there is a man who has lived through poverty, loss, betrayal, war, regret, and heartbreak, and still wakes up to care, to give, to love. His body may be aging, but his spirit, it was forged in fire. He still mentors through Kickstart Kids, giving children the same discipline and hope that once saved him. Because Chuck Norris was never truly invincible. He just never stopped getting back up. If Chuck Norris has ever touched your heart, whether in film, martial arts, or through the strength of his story, honor him now. Tap that like button. Let it be more than just a click. Let it be a salute. Subscribe for more true stories behind legends. Watch the next video to discover another hero whose strength was built on pain. And remember, even legends bleed, but the greatest ones heal others with the scars they carry.